Hi everybody, my name is Dustin Simmons. I'm an LPN to BSN student at Indiana State University. Today I'd like to talk to you about homeless populations and how they gain their health care. As I'm sure we all know, homelessness is a growing problem here in the United States and around the world. Homelessness puts their populations at risk for many diseases and many illnesses. Diseases and illnesses that they cannot gain healthcare for because either lack of funds or various other reasons. And today I'd like to talk with you guys a little bit about that. Before we get started, I'd like to ask you to take a moment and go do the pre-test so you can kind of see where you're sitting on the subject before the presentation. Below is a list of learning objectives that I would like for you guys to walk away from this course having the knowledge of. Just take a moment and review those for me. Thanks. As we all know, there are many challenges that the homeless face. For one, they have a lack of resources. They lack food, shelter, clothing, access to clean water. All these things stem from their stature in the world and their homeless situation. And unfortunately, because of all this, they also carry a great stigma on their shoulders. This population is looked at as being unclean, unhealthy, and, for lack of a better term, untouchable, which faces them with problems every day. And unfortunately, it also limits their access to healthcare or their willingness to seek healthcare. They also have difficulty accessing healthcare due to lack of transportation, lack of funds, or, as we just discussed, the stigma that is shown to them. As I'm sure we have all seen at least one homeless person in our lives, we kind of already have a mental picture of what these folks appear like, which is part of that stigma that we were just talking about. And unfortunately, many of these homeless folks also carry many diseases and illnesses with them. One study showed that at least 80% have one physical ailment, whether it's bone deformities or arthritis or missing a limb. At least 80% have at least one of those things that hinder their physical movement. 70% have mental illness, which we all know is difficult enough to deal with as a healthy adult in a stable environment. I can't even imagine what it would be like to deal with that in an environment where I wasn't able to get the care that I needed. Because of the physical and mental illnesses that these folks have, a lot of them turn to drugs and alcohol to kind of cope with their situation in life and kind of cope with these issues. And because of that, it is a very real problem within this population. And honestly, this population is 40 times less likely to have a general practitioner. That means these folks are not getting care a great majority of the time. So they're left to deal with these ailments on their own. What this kind of all adds up to and what this leads the homeless populations to do is go to the ER anytime that they have an illness or sickness that is becoming too much for them to handle or cope with on their own. This leads to a massive delay in treatment and otherwise furthered state of illness. This means that when they do come into the ERs and do come to the hospitals, a lot of times these illnesses and disease processes are in a very, very serious state. States that are often difficult to treat and take longer times to treat. Because these illnesses are at an increased in a severe state when they are seen in the hospital, this also leads to more inpatient admissions and longer admissions. In fact, the study that I looked at showed that ER visits were 5 times more likely by the homeless population. Those inpatient admissions were 4 times more common, and the admissions were 3 times longer. That means not only are these folks showing up in the ERs more times than the general population, when they do show up, they are more than likely going to be admitted because of the serious state of their disease, and their admissions are going to be longer, which ends up meaning more care is needed for them. And what unfortunately usually happens is when these folks get treated inpatient, when they are finally released and discharged from the hospital, they are left with nowhere to go. They have no shelter set up. They have no resources still. So what this leads to is the patients going back out and living on the streets where they were. Which this means that there can be no follow-up, no follow-up care, no follow-up anything with the hospitals to make sure that these folks are getting the care that they need. A lot of times these folks can't be contacted to make sure that they are getting the care that they need. And what this kind of leads to is a vicious cycle that is ER visit, admission, discharge, repeat in this cycle. And that's extremely difficult for these folks to break. One solution to this problem is a hospital-based housing officer. With these housing officers located within the hospitals, they could potentially see these patients same day as they get the referral to kind of get the ball moving as soon as possible. They would be able to arrange temporary accommodations and, most importantly, escort these patients straight to their accommodations at discharge. They also would be able to assist in arranging permanent housing. They would be able to get these patients referred to the cessation services that they may need if they are, dealing with drug and alcohol addiction. And they can also assist in follow-up care, which is now possible because they have either temporary or permanent residence or housing accommodations. You may be asking yourself, why would these housing officers be employed at the hospital or be based at the hospital? And that answer is really the population is present at the hospital in greater numbers than the general population, meaning it's a great place for these housing officers to actually be linked up with this population. Also, the housing officer would be able to collaborate with the hospital, and it would be a vital step to ending the vicious cycle that is ER visit, admission, discharge back to the streets. This would kind of close the distance and allow for easier communication and referral. This essentially would all lead to more effective patient care, lead to better patient-centered care as well, and ultimately a better patient outcome with proper follow-up and proper treatment. The goal of this housing officer would be very simple, allowing for a safe temporary or permanent residence, a place for safe recovery, adequate follow-up, and greater positive potential patient outcomes. In conclusion, homelessness is something that is affecting every person in every city of the U.S. And getting a housing officer within the hospital to assist in care for the homeless and aftercare for the homeless folks could be an extremely vital step in ending the vicious cycle that they have been accustomed to with the hospital admissions. Thank you all for listening. Please take the post test at the end. Thanks. Have a great day.